You are listening to STR, the Sandy Times Radio. Culture, music, and beyond.
Welcome back to Watch the Icon, the podcast where timepieces are more than just machines. They are myths in motion. I'm Sophia Brontwine, publisher of the Sandy Times, and in today's episode, the fifth in our 10-part series, we swap polished saloons for burning rubber. This is the story of horsepower, Hollywood, and horology, a tale that begins on the racetrack and ends in the stratosphere of cultural relevance. Today, we are talking about a chronograph so iconic it's known by a single word: Daytona. The Rolex Cosmograph Daytona is more than a stopwatch. It's a symbol of speed, precision, and status, forged at 200 miles per hour and immortalized by the most unexpected of muses, Paul Newman. But to understand how a slow-selling sports watch became the crown jewel of collecting, we need to go back. Not to the 1960s, not yet, but to the very origins of Rolex itself. Rolex was founded in 1905 by Hans Wilsdorf, a young German entrepreneur living in London. His vision? A wristwatch that was not only stylish but precise. That idea was almost laughable at the time. Wristwatches were dainty, unreliable accessories worn mostly by women. The real measure of timekeeping, so the thinking went, sat firmly in your waistcoat pocket. Wilsdorf bet otherwise. He pushed for chronometric precision in a tiny case, and in 1910, Rolex received the first Swiss certificate of chronometric precision awarded to a wristwatch. It was only the beginning. Over the next few decades, Rolex would become synonymous with innovation. The first waterproof case with the Oyster in 1926, the first automatically winding movement with a perpetual rotor in 1931, and in 1953, the first modern dive watch with a submariner, a tool watch that made history underwater on wrists like Jacques Cousteau's. But there was one frontier Rolex hadn't yet conquered: speed. As aviation and motorsport advanced in the early 20th century, a new breed of watch emerged, the chronograph. A complication that could time intervals precisely, with subdials to track seconds, minutes, and hours. Pilots used them to calculate fuel loads. Engineers used them to calibrate machines. And drivers? They used them to chase victory. By the 1950s, Omega had the Speedmaster, Heuer had the Otavia, Breitling had the Navitimer. Rolex? They were late to the grid. Before the Daytona became a household name, Rolex chronographs were, well, something of a footnote. In the 1930s and 40s, Rolex experimented with single and double pusher chronographs, often 33 to 36 mm in size, with stylometer and tachymeter scales. Beautiful? Yes. Collectible today? Certainly. But at the time, they lacked the distinctiveness of Rolex professional tool watches. Then, in 1955, Rolex released the reference 6234, a pre-Daytona, though it wasn't called that yet. It featured 3 subdials, a tachymeter scale on the dial, and a manually wound Valjoux 72 movement. Sound familiar? It should. The DNA of the Daytona was all there, but the watch didn't exactly take off. Only around 500 were produced each year. These were tools, not trophies. Ragged, Spartan, and built to time-lapse, not impressed dinner guests. It wasn't until 1963 that everything changed. In 1963, Rolex unveiled the Cosmograph reference 6239. This was the first model to be marketed specifically to racing drivers. It had contrasting subdials for increased legibility, a tachymeter scale engraved directly onto the bezel, freeing up space on the dial, and a bold, muscular aesthetic. But most importantly, it had a name: Daytona. Why Daytona? The answer is speed. Daytona Beach, Florida was long considered the birthplace of American motorsport. In the early 20th century, the flat, hard-packed sand made it the perfect venue for land speed records. By the 1960s, the newly built Daytona International Speedway had become one of the most prestigious tracks in the world, home of the grueling 24 Hours of Daytona. Rolex saw an opportunity. They sponsored the race, they named the watch after it, and they created something that would eventually transcend its mechanical purpose. The Daytona was a tool for racers, but Rolex wanted it to be their tool for racers. Still, it didn't sell, not at first. Early Daytonas, especially with exotic dials, sat on shelves for years. Ads couldn't move them. The irony? Well, those same shelf sisters now command seven figures at auction. Which brings us to the man who changed everything. Paul Newman wasn't just an actor. He was a cultural icon, blue-eyed, magnetic, effortlessly cool. But what many people don't know is that Newman was also a serious racing driver. After starring in the 1969 film Winning, he caught the racing bug. By the 1970s, he was competing in professional races across the US and Europe. And on his wrist, a Rolex Daytona, reference 6239, with a cream dial, black subdials, and a distinctive Art Deco font on the minute track. This was the so-called exotic dial Daytona, manufactured by Rolex but produced by Singer, an external dial maker. Rolex didn't market it as anything special. In fact, it was less popular than the standard dial. But when photos of Newman wearing the watch emerged, especially alongside his legendary racing career, a new nickname was born, the Paul Newman Daytona. For years, collectors used that name informally. Auction houses followed suit. And by the 1990s, the Paul Newman Daytonas had become some of the most desirable watches on the planet. The culmination came in 2017, when Newman's actual personal Daytona, the one gifted by his wife Joan Woodward, engraved with the words "Drive carefully me," sold at Phillips for $17.75 million. It became the most expensive wristwatch ever sold at auction at the time, and the Daytona was no longer just a racing chronograph, it was legend. Let's take a pit stop to run through some of the key Daytona references. Reference 6239, the first real Daytona, with pump pushers and metal bezel, manual wind, Valiju 72 movement. Reference 6263 or 6265, screw-down pushers for better water resistance, oyster case, black or silver dials, and those magical Paul Newman variants hidden among them. Reference 16520, the automatic Daytona arrives, with the Zenith El Primero movement, heavily modified by Rolex. This reference brought the Daytona into the modern era, with a 40mm case and sapphire crystal. Reference 116520. Rolex introduces its first in-house chronograph movement, the caliber 4130, a marvel of engineering with fewer components, longer power reserve, and bulletproof reliability. Reference 116500LN. Kerachrome ceramic bezel, white or black dial, and that perfect blend of sport and status. The most coveted modern steel sports watch for years. Reference 126500LN, the latest evolution. Slimmer locks, subtle case refinements, updated movement, calibers 4131, and an exhibition case back in select versions, a first for a steel Daytona. Over 60 years, the Daytona has barely changed the silhouette, and that's the genius. It's a masterclass in restraint. So what makes the Daytona so iconic? First, it's a blend of form and function. It's a real chronograph, one that has been worn by actual racing drivers. Its roots are tool watch, through and through. Second, it's the scarcity. Rolex famously keeps supply tight. Steel Daytonas at retail are almost mythical. Wait lists stretch years. The result? Demand outpaces supply and the hype feeds itself. Third, it's the cultural cachet. From Paul Newman and Eric Clapton to modern icons like John Mayer and Ellen DeGeneres, the Daytona is wrist shorthand for taste, wealth, and subtle rebellion. It doesn't shout, it smolders. On the secondary market, Daytonas are blue-chip assets. Vintage references with exotic dials sell for millions. Even modern references, retailing for under $15,000, trade at double that, sometimes more. But here is the twist. For all the hype, the Daytona never feels like it's trying too hard. It's not about opulence, it's about precision. Even Rolex advertising reflects this. Images of race cars, pit crews, and time trials. It's never about celebrities, it's about excellence. That's the paradox of the Daytona. It's both elite and elemental, both a timekeeping instrument and a pop culture artifact. Today, the Daytona is more than a chronograph, it's a canvas. There are platinum versions with ice blue dials, gold models with meteorite faces, diamond set bezels, rainbow Daytonas covered in sapphires and worn by everyone from Post Malone to Cristiano Ronaldo. Yet, the most coveted remains the classic. White or black dial, stainless steel, ceramic bezel. The beauty lies in the balance, sporty but not bulky, luxurious but not loud. A watch that started in the pit lane and ended up in the penthouse. If history tells us anything, it's that Rolex won't mess with success. The Daytona will evolve, but it won't reinvent. And that's what makes it iconic. Because icons don't chase trends, they define them. That's it for episode 5 of Watch the Icon. The Rolex Daytona wasn't born a legend. It earned its place on the podium, one lap, one wrist, one era-defining photograph at a time. Next time, we'll leave the racetrack and head to the yacht deck, but the stakes are just as high. Because in episode 6, we will tell the story of a watch born from steel, shaped by a porthole and drawn, quite literally, on a hotel napkin. It was misunderstood at launch, but today it's the crown jewel of countless collections. Yes, we are talking about the Patek Philippe Nautilus, the other icon designed by Gerald Genta, and perhaps the most elegant rebel of them all. If you've been enjoying the journey so far, don't forget to subscribe, rate us, and share Watch the Icon with your fellow enthusiasts. Got a Daytona on your wrist? Tag us online. We'd love to see how you wear yours. Until next time, remember, icons don't follow time, they reshape it.